Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here. I recently just had the great pleasure of celebrating a birthday in my late 30s now. Woo! We made it. We made it. I had a really lovely occasion to celebrate the birthday. It was a bit of a surprise. A friend of mine baked a birthday cake for me. And in the midst of the people who were celebrating the birthday, I made a proclamation, a truth claim, that there were only 3 people in my life who had ever baked me a birthday cake, and one of them stopped doing it when I was about 10. I started to tell the story later of why that special someone stopped baking me birthday cakes when I was 10, and as many of my stories from my childhood go, it's because I was a rotten brat. I recall the time that my mother loved to celebrate the holidays, and so my birthday's around Halloween, and she made a birthday cake with some Halloween decorations, and I was not pleased. My birthday deserved its own decorations, not Halloween decorations, and I let her know about it. And I, if I recall correctly, heard her respond, "Fine, make your own cake." And so from what I remember, that was the last birthday cake that my mom baked for me. It's not that that was the last cake we ever had for my birthday. Didn't lead some sort of torturous existence as a child, but that's the last one she made for me. So that was a truth claim, and I held it, and I have held it for 20-something years. I didn't build up any resentment or anything. We get along just fine, but I've held that to be true. So I was explaining that to my family, and just set that aside there at the end of October. Here we are at the end of November. My family, my kids especially, were interested this past week in learning about my beloved dog, my yellow Labrador, TJ, that I had when I turned, I think I got TJ when I was like 13. They wanted to see pictures. And so I pull out, we still have the old family albums, right? I pull out the old family albums. We start going through the photos, flipping through, and here are the pictures of my dog when I was 14. And we keep going. I keep showing them how the dog's getting bigger and bigger. He became huge. We got around my 16th birthday when I got to show them how huge my dog was. Right as I showed them the picture of my family circled around a chocolate cake that was clearly homemade with some candles in it. My mom made me a cake 6 years after I said she stopped making me cakes. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, Mom. I wasn't lying. I believed it to be true, right? I wasn't lying, but I was not correct. I bring that up because it points to this reality of ours, that belief and truth are not the same thing. One can believe something that's not true. However, belief makes something true enough to us that we begin to behave as if it were true, even if we can't grab a hold of it. Right? When we believe that your mother stopped baking you a cake forever ago, well, I'll say it on the positive side, that made me value my birthday cake this year that much more. We know that to be true. We know it to be true that there's a really confusing relationship between belief and truth, right? Those of us who have paid attention to these kinds of questions through the years know that that's probably more the case now in the last couple hundred years than it ever has been the case. There are more philosophical systems to describe truth or reality than there ever have been, and they are so confusing. I am a member of a generation that 70-some-odd% of us believe that there is no real such thing as truth to begin with, which is an odd way to claim a truth, isn't it? As a student of philosophy, I learned a lot about the maybe 5 or 6 major ways that we can understand the answer to Pontius Pilate's question here with Jesus. What is truth? They are, again, confusing, but they come under these major kind of collective umbrellas. One is this, that truth is a subjective claim. You might have heard it this way, truth is relative. Your truth and my truth, they might not exactly line up with one another. We can interpret things differently. Truth is culturally situated. Our truth and the truth of somebody living thousands of years ago on the other side of the planet, we shouldn't expect them to align too much. It's relative. Another version to describe a potential way of understanding truth is that truth is, and here's the philosophical term, it's pragmatic or expedient. What is true is that which helps us assert our will to power. It only needs to be true as long as it is useful to us. I hope for some of you that pushes some of your skeptical buttons. It should. It's a bit of a bizarre claim, and yet it is the claim that was made by the German philosopher Nietzsche. It's been held by many, many through the years, and usually, well, we'll talk about the outcomes of it, but in general, I would say that the outcomes aren't so positive. An additional umbrella is the notion of correspondence. We won't get into this too much, but the idea is that truth is that which somehow is related to reality. That's the definition of truth that most of us still hold at some level. It's the definition of truth that comes from the dictionary. It's the primary way of understanding what is true. What's true is what's real. What's true as a concept is what represents to me the reality that we experience. It's a bit shaky, though, because our experiences are so different. And so there is this one degree beyond that which says, in spite of the fact that our ability to name what corresponds to truth might be challenged by the fact that we're just humans, there is the existence of an absolute truth. It's a notion that's been around for thousands of years. It's not something that Christianity has a claim on uniquely. The philosophers in ancient Greece had it. In fact, the word in ancient Greek and the word in Greek used here between Jesus and Pilate really refers to that which is no longer concealed, that which is unconcealed, meaning that there is a truth out there that is somehow to us hidden, but what becomes true is when it suddenly isn't so hidden anymore. Some of you are probably thoroughly confused. That's okay. It's not really the point to give you the philosophical background on these things, but instead to say this: each one of these has its challenges. Each notion of truth has its challenges as we believe them. They are philosophies until we incorporate them into our lives, and then they change our behavior. Relativism tends to promote a behavior that excuses whatever it is we're looking to excuse. Are lies bad? Is charity good? It's all relative. It's all relative, usually based on whether or not I'm a particularly honest person or a particularly charitable person. However it is that I'm living my life, or however it is that I want to live my life, relativism allows me to find a way to support it. Pragmatism is another thing altogether. As I said, it's the type of truth claim that Pontius Pilate would make if we were able to hear him answer the question, what is truth? What's useful to me? What allows me to maintain my sense of power or authority in this world? If you don't know the story, Pontius Pilate was appointed by a governor who himself had been appointed by Rome to keep the peace in this territory, especially from Jerusalem, to quell any rebellion, to quiet any rumor of war, to keep the peace, even if it meant using a little bit of violence or a little bit of mistrust or a little bit of misdirection or a little bit of manipulation. And all that really seemed to matter to Pontius Pilate was getting the job done as he defined it. So truth was a tool. Pontius Pilate knows that when Jesus is brought to him on trial, that both the evidence against Jesus is false and the method by which the trial will be held is faulty. He knows that there is no chance of getting out of this with truth intact. He's so cynical and hopeless about the nature of truth. He just goes on to carry out what his actions will ultimately be and to hand Jesus over to be crucified. He asks the question to Jesus' statement, Jesus saying, I came to witness to the absolute truth. As Jesus has said previously in the gospel, he is the absolute truth. Pilate, confronted with that, says, what is truth? But he doesn't stick around to hear the question even answered. He rushes right out to the crowd and says, I found no fault with this guy, but you go ahead and do what you want to do. Because that's what would keep Pontius Pilate in power, at least for a little while. That's what would keep the rebellion from happening, what would keep the riot from breaking out, and allow him to succeed. Relativism excuses. Pragmatism, in this case, corrupts. Correspondence at least seems murky, but there's another way of talking about it. That in spite of our frailty, no matter how uncalibrated our instruments can be for understanding what the truth is, truth has these hallmarks when it's real, or so we believe in Christianity. The truth sets people free. And that truth is ultimately and absolutely God's love. Meaning both that God is love and that God loves. Every statement of faith, every belief that Christianity has to be undergirded by these things, these claims. And ultimately, in Christianity, it doesn't really matter very much what you and I believe about all the other faith claims that we might make. How much our faith claims correspond to that reality is a question that we have left to answer, that we might shape, that you and I might debate about or understand differently, that you and I might choose to enact differently in our walk in faith. But what matters isn't whether or not we believe correctly about God's love, but whether or not God loves us. That's an absolute truth claim. One that disarms the nature of a pragmatic truth or the nature of a relative truth, or even disarms the threat of our inability to understand truth in its entirety. We live in a world and in a society in which we play fast and loose with the notion of truth, in which we sometimes believe that truth cannot be defined or articulated, or maybe there is no such thing. We live in a world where the relativism of the last century is giving way more and more to that corrupting nature of truth is what serves me, keeps me in power, allows me to do what I want to do. And to all these things, God's truth is that God knows all of that about us and loves us anyway. You see, that is God's ultimate truth. That Jesus, in the face of the Pontius Pilate who will choose to allow him to be crucified, loves him anyway. That you, no matter what you have done or will do in your life, are also loved entirely. That by definition, the truth of you and the truth of me, no matter what we choose to believe, is that you are a beloved child of God. Now, truth is different than belief. We can believe that or not believe that, but it doesn't change that that is what God says of us. We can choose to not believe in God, but it won't change that God will believe in you. You can choose not to love God, but it won't change that God chooses to love you. And though that is an absolute truth, what you and I still have left to do is to ascribe and assert and incorporate a belief that will allow us to act in a way that corresponds with reality. And so we have to ask, do our behaviors as individuals, as a society, as a church, as a people, do we act in a way that is in correspondence with our belief that every one of you and everyone around us and everyone in this world is a beloved child of God? In everything that we do we proclaim that God's love is the absolute truth in this world? My sense is we can probably do a little bit better. I know I can. My sense is that we have a long way to go, but that we have a proclamation to make nonetheless. Today is a feast of the church called Christ the King, or the reign of Christ. Today is a day where we are faced with a choice once again. Will you let the truth of God's love reign in your heart? Will you let the truth of God's love define who you are? Will you let the truth of God's love shape the way that you treat one another and all of God's beloved children? Will you let the truth of God's love be the authority in your life?